Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at B2B World. In today's show, we will be talking about the current economic situation of the country, of course, something that the country has been struggling with for quite some time now. And even though we had the IMF delegation visiting Pakistan earlier last month, it is still something that we are waiting in terms of the conclusion of the staff level agreement, which according to the Finance Minister Aqdas is expected to be concluded within the next week. However, there are many conditions and concerns that still remain, and a lot of the experts are talking about how perhaps the IMF and the way that it's been dealing with Pakistan is now something that is of quite concern to the country since in the past as well. This is something that Pakistan has had to face, and there have been parallels being drawn with situations back in 1998. There's also concerns with regards to conditions of prior actions that the IMF has put forward and how those interpretations may have changed over the course of the discussion, especially over the course of the time that has passed since the visit of the IMF delegations, and perhaps the political elements of this particular discussion is what have taken more hold rather than what was previously discussed. This, of course, is pointing towards a lot of uncertainty in terms of where Pakistan stands, and then, of course, in light of the new downgrading of ratings by Moody's, is also something that Pakistan is dealing with. The rupee has further depreciated with a record about 19 rupees value being lost just today, and the dollar standing at a historic high. And because of this, there is, of course, a lot of increase in the cost of living and cost of doing business. And then we also, of course, don't really have a staff level agreement at the moment. And this, of course, is putting the situation of the current situation of the country at a point where a number of people are talking about default, something that once again has been reiterated by the finance minister is not something that is happening. The foreign exchange reserves, according to a tweet that he posted earlier, are in fact better than they were 4 weeks ago, and that the external payments have been made, and that the indicators are all moving towards the right directions. But what does that mean in terms of where Pakistan stands today, particularly with the IMF, and then of course with the overall economic conditions and the measures that it has to take in the remaining fiscal year and in the times to come, is something that we are still facing trouble with, and we are going to be exploring it in this discussion today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi, and we've also been joined online by Dr. Aqdas Afzal, who's also a senior economist. Thank you very much, Dr. Aqdas, for being a part of the discussion, as always. And let me start with you, considering, of course, firstly, where we stand in terms of our discussions with the IMF. There have been a lot of questions being raised about what the IMF has been talking to us previously and what they're saying now. Do you think that there is perhaps any difference in the approach or in the conditions that have been put forward by the IMF, particularly in the aftermath of their visit to Pakistan? And if so, what sort of indicators are the reasons behind those? Is the situation inevitable and so the discussion has had to change, or is there any sort of difference in terms of the way Pakistan is being treated by the IMF, is what of course is being referred to as a problem in these discussions as well? Is that something that's happening with the IMF?
Thank you very much for taking me on the show. In preparation for tonight's program, I was doing some reading, and I would just like to take your audience back to some of the statements that have been made by the IMF. So I would like to just refer to what the managing director of the IMF said, that they would not like to put any pressure on the poor people of Pakistan.
Yes, go ahead.
And right. And then I was just looking at the World Economic Outlook update. That is a report that is published by the IMF every 6 months or so. And the report clearly states that the balance of risks remains tilted to the downside, meaning that the IMF itself is recognizing the extremely challenging global economic situation that is being faced by emerging economies, especially countries like Pakistan. And when you couple that with what the managing director of the IMF has been saying, that she would not like the poor people in Pakistan to suffer, I see a very large and yawning gap between what is being preached and what is being practiced by the IMF. So, for example, the conditions that were laid down by the IMF for, the mini budget of an extra $170 billion. Now, most of these taxes are going to be regressive in nature. And who is going to bear the weight or burden of these taxes, primarily it's going to be the poor people of this country. So again, I see a yawning gap between what is being preached by the IMF and what is being practiced. So that got me thinking. And so I looked at some of the different conditions that had been laid down by the IMF for Pakistan. It's a pretty standard affair. Whenever IMF goes to, or rather a country goes to the IMF for assistance, because the IMF is a lender of last resort, it lays down an array of conditions, which are generally known as conditionalities. And the standard formula is that the IMF wants this particular emerging economy or any economy that goes to the IMF to slow down its economy so that it can get a grip over the external account and also bring its fiscal house in order. So as far as that is concerned, it's a pretty standard formula. So that got me thinking. And I could not wrap my head around the fact that why is it taking the IMF so long to approve something, all the conditions that have been met by Pakistan. So then I did some background reading, and then I finally understood that we have to understand what is going on between the IMF and Ministry of Finance in the wider context of this burgeoning rivalry between two great powers, that is the US and China. Because some people have argued, Sana, that the IMF, FATF, and some of these other institutions are basically an extension of American foreign policy. So what is basically happening here is that it's not just a treatment that is being meted out against Pakistan. I mean, I looked at some numbers for Sri Lanka, for Ghana, for Zambia. All these countries are waiting for a staff level agreement or disbursement of the tranche. And it's so in the case of Sri Lanka, and we all know the kind of situation that Sri Lanka was facing. I mean, the situation is extremely dire. It's a country that actually defaulted. Sri Lanka has been waiting for the last 182 days. That's over 6 months. In the case of Ghana, it's been almost 3 months. And in the case of Zambia, it's been almost 9 months that they've been waiting for disbursement of the grant. So what is basically going on is the IMF, by withholding funds to all these emerging economies that also have a significant amount of Chinese loans in their external debt makeup, it's basically trying to pressurize China to provide more and more relief to these countries, including Pakistan. And I think this is one of the reasons why the IMF is taking its sweet time, whereas Pakistan has met different conditions that we needed to meet. And now the disbursement of this tranche should have become pretty automatic by now. So I think we have to understand what is going on in the wider context of this burgeoning rivalry between US and China.
Right, and I understand that, Dr. Aqdas, but I want to also understand what it means in terms of tangible measures that can be taken by a country if there is such ill intent or malicious measures being taken in a larger perspective. Then how exactly does that play out when you're actually dealing with the IMF? Because at the end of the day, perhaps these things are clearer in evidence or in the way that things have occurred in retrospect, more so than when they are happening. And so at the moment, in terms of a dealing between a country and an international financial institutions, how will we be able to play this factor into the way that we want to proceed further?
Look, what I'm trying to say here is I'm not trying to refer to any malicious intent. What I'm trying to say is that there is an evolving geopolitical context in which different institutions are being pressured or they have different priorities. And this is just the world that we are living in right now. So we have to understand how the world or these institutions are now operating in this new geopolitical context where there is a burgeoning competition and rivalry between two great powers. So I just want to, I wanted to say that. Okay. Now to come back to your question. Oh, please go ahead.
No, that's okay. I understand that. Go ahead.
Okay, so in order to answer your question, what options does Pakistan have or what kind of leverage we can draw from the situation? Unfortunately, Pakistan does not have a lot of leverage. I mean, Pakistan now has a foreign exchange cover of roughly 3 weeks. And I think the situation is becoming very, very precarious. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of a very, very volatile political situation in Pakistan. The political instability in Pakistan is not stabilizing. And we have been seeing this for the last 1 year. So I think uh, political instability, economic urgency, these two things together make for a very, very potent and dangerous combo or combination. So I think Pakistan does not have much leverage. Whatever Pakistan could do, we have done, and this includes increasing interest rate by 300 basis points, highest um, rate of interest since 1996, whereas Pakistan is facing inflation almost at 32%, which is the highest recorded inflation since Pakistan started recording inflation in the year 1965, and Pakistan has not doing much in the when it comes to economic growth. So I think our options are extremely limited. So I think there's not much Pakistan can do right now. Unfortunately, this is the situation, and I really hope that experts and the administration of the IMF can really understand the urgency that Pakistani society and economy is facing right now. Because if this government is not able to stabilize the economy in the next 1 month, I think we are going to see some very, very severe political and social unrest in this country. That is not going to be, um, this is not something that somebody at the IMF or somebody who is a responsible member of the international community would like to witness. So I would like to, again, reach out to the IMF. I would try to, and I would like them to develop the appreciation from the ground level here in Pakistan, that the situation is very dire, and I think they need to do everything within their power to speed up the release of this strand so that Pakistani government can stabilize this economy and avert default.
Right. Farrukh, when we look at the situation, you have mentioned in the past as well that when we talk about moving ahead with the IMF, of course, it's going to be tough. But what about if we don't go to the IMF and what the situation is going to be like then? And of course, we're limited in our options and where we stand today and how we want to proceed with it. But in terms of what Dr. Aqdas has pointed out, especially in terms of the geopolitical context and also perhaps how we are going to be impacted largely in terms of the poor segments of the society as well. And if this is what is the option that we have today, how will we be able to bring in the conversation around what the IMF needs to also consider, particularly in terms of the consequence of social or political consequence within the country? Because at the end of this day, we're still trying to make at least the staff level agreement possible, which seems that is being announced next week. But where we stand today, there are still numerous directions that this country can take.
Right. Sana, first of all, welcome back.
Thank you.
Earlier, when you were introducing us, I thought that you didn't allow any space for us to actually welcome you back, but then I found my way. Regarding,
like you always do.
Regarding the question that you're asking and what Dr. Saab has just said, of course, there are geopolitical issues that need to be discussed, and there is a broader context, not only externally but internally as well, where this matter regarding social sector and how it is going to impact the very poor, that is also important. But before I actually, and we have time in the program, I will like to later talk about geopolitics. I want to ask you a question, and I want to take a mandate. There are two ways to answer your question. One is diplomatic answer, where I actually try to sugarcoat everything and try to actually control what I have to say, and I'm very effectively I can do that as well. The second one is spare nobody and be very honest, because this is an existential situation right now. Tell me, which one should I opt for?
The second one.
Okay, thank you very much. Then remember that you actually asked for it. Let us start from what has triggered today's debate, and that is the appreciation of dollar. 19 rupee appreciation of dollar is taking place in the country, and of course everybody in the media keeps on complaining that, oh, the country is sinking, country is sinking. A quick question, who is buying these dollars, right? Usually when price actually goes up, Sana, either there can be only two elements. One, the shortage of supply, or then increased demand. So there is no shortage regarding the supply. So where exactly does the problem lie? It lies in the purchasing desire of the people. So who are doing it? Very simple answer: people who want to speculate, right? And who are those people? Are they Americans? Are they Chinese? Are they Indian, for that matter? No, they're Pakistani. If we will keep on doing this to our own economy, then of course the dollar will keep on going up, because then you're destroying your own rupee. This is the first thing that needs to be said. The second thing is regarding what IMF is doing to us. Very quick question. All these demands were there in November as well, when we had to actually start negotiations. Why did we take this long to meet them, right? The fact of the matter is that, one thing that you have to understand, no matter what you do, you cannot kind of strong arm or influence IMF when it has laid out all the demands. At this moment, it is not merely about meeting or IMF being the only option. The biggest challenge right now for us is we are in the middle, actually total end of a program. If we don't succeed in completing it, we are cast away as stigmatized, diseased economy. So it is in our interest to meet all those demands. Had you done it in time, the situation would not have changed. So what exactly is happening right now? Why is it that between November and now we changed the finance minister, and why is it that our junior ministry, finance ministry, official, that is the junior minister or minister of state, she has gone on 3-week leave? This is a big question, right? You have to understand that no matter what you do, in the end you have to meet the demands of the fund. So if you had to do it, you could have done it earlier, as the Prime Minister was suggesting, as the previous Finance Minister was suggesting. Now let us come to the third part of the problem, and where comes the MD's statement, or IMF's MD's statement regarding poor not being taxed. Do you know what this government, when it actually came to power, proposed? It introduced one-time super tax on the ultra rich, right? 10% one-time tax. And where did it go? It got stuck in the courts. And in the end, through mediation, the Supreme Court, when it actually allowed it, it allowed only 4%. How is the government supposed to fund the rest of the fiscal deficit that is there? So they had to go for, because time is of the essence, they had to actually increase the regressive tax, that is GST or indirect tax. And because of that, inflation is even further increasing. We all have to actually look into the mirror. When we don't understand something, don't actually stop it. But that was done also. Finally, regarding overall situation, when you talk about our consumption and situation, do you think that the policies regarding price control mechanism are smooth in this country? Are we importing whatever we needed to import? We are not. And because of that situation, we keep on sinking down and down. Of course, IMF is also being seen as an enforcer of some kind these days of this geopolitical realities. Because of BRI, India became important, and Adani group somehow became a counterweight to BRI project. That's why Bangladesh was a country where Adani group actually went and started selling coal-powered energy, and the cost they are charging are exorbitant. Then IMF comes and pushes them to actually spread this, pass this pressure to the common man, and that is done. But right now, I understand that the demands that are being made, especially regarding interest rate, that was essential, Sana, because what is coming next is going to be horrible. Adani Group is literally melting down before our eyes, and there is going to be a huge vacuum in this region because of its failure, and because of that you need to protect your own economy. And the best thing is keep on jacking up the interest rate till the time the storm has passed.
Right. Dr. Aqdas, considering these situations and of course the kind of measures that Farrukh has pointed out, it seems that perhaps the very tough measures that we'll have to take, of course, will be impacting the people in general and the way we move forward. But it seems that at this moment in time, there is something which is the dire need of the country and where we stand in terms of what the global indicators have been pointing out and what are political and daily behaviors within the public domain also point towards, and those are things perhaps fundamentally which take a lot of time to be able to for us to process and for us to be able to regulate them. And so if that is not happening and where we stand with the IMF is also tough, isn't this something that Pakistan will have to at least for now balance out in terms of what has been said, even if the conditions seem to be unusual or a bit more towards the own interests, as you pointed out earlier?
Well, there are no two ways about it. I mean, like I said, whatever the IMF asked Pakistan to do, we have delivered on that front. And this includes increasing the interest rate by a whopping 300 basis points. That includes a mini budget of 170 billion rupees. That includes jacking up electricity and gas prices. That includes ending many subsidies, including subsidies to some of the export sectors. So I think there is really nothing left as far as Pakistan is concerned. So I think the ball is now finally in the IMF's court. Pakistan has done its share of the deal, and now the IMF needs to speed up and disperse the tranche so that Pakistani economy can be stabilized, so that the friendly countries can pour in the money that they have promised. Because without this, I think we are staring down, a very, very
Right.
concerning situation,
Right,
economic
Dr.
situation
Aqdas,
next month.
what about the issue of the exchange rate as well? Of course, that is being something that is being talked about with regards to Pakistan also moving towards exchange rate in the open market. But now the IMF asking for this to be moved to the grey market to be able to perhaps control the purchase of dollars from there is an important one, of course, in terms of how it's affecting the value of the rupee as well. But is that something that is also considered unusual, or do you think that this is a measure that is being called for at the moment?
It's a very standard demand that the IMF makes. Recently, in the case of Egypt, they forced the Egyptian government to let the Egyptian pound the value of the Egyptian pound be determined by market forces. So it's a very standard recipe because the idea is that the change in the price of the currencies. Sometimes it becomes more expensive, sometimes it becomes less expensive. These days, it's been losing value against the US dollar, provides a corrective mechanism to international trade flows. So it's a very standard recipe, and I don't see anything unusual about it. However, in the current situation, I think this downward slide of about 20 rupees today and 6 rupees yesterday, this massive downward slide in these 2 days is purely being driven by uncertainty, fear, chaos, and probably somebody or a consortium is trying to short Pakistani currency as well. So all these things are happening because Pakistan the economy cannot find its footing, and the IMF has been dragging its feet, creating the situation unnecessarily. There is no need for this. And so I really hope that what the finance minister said today, that we will have a staff level agreement next week, I think that would be probably the best news of the year as far as Pakistan is concerned.
Right. Farrukh, there's also the issue of the downgrading of ratings of Pakistan by different agencies as well, particularly Moody's as well, which is also being cited as a factor in the value of the rupee. But at the moment at where we stand, or in such situations where countries are already struggling, and the impact of these downgrading is of course high as well in terms of the value of the currency and how the dealings with different institutions is being looked at. What sort of a role do these agencies then have to play in terms of a situation like this in countries where they're already dealing with issues and the impact that these efforts and measures may have?
Right, Sana, there's a term called Ouroboros. That is, if you have seen snake actually chewing its own tail, right? That is circular situation when every condition feeds in another situation, right? You keep on complementing the same failures repeatedly, and then you go round and round, you go in circles. So exactly this is what is happening with the credit rating agencies. Because the country's foreign currency reserves are shrinking, because the country is under pressure, and because we haven't seen any kind of let up in the economic crisis, they will keep on reducing your credit rating. And that actually affects, because it is clearly credit rating. Because of that, the lenders are going to expect more profits or more interest and more guarantees or safeguards, right? That continues to happen, and that affects the investor or FDI as well. But that is not a lookout right now. Consider where we are at. Our economy, our agricultural economy was destroyed by the floods, right? We immediately need some kind of breather. And then our dollar, our capacity to repay debts is also suffering because our forex reserves have shrunk. What Dr. Saab actually said was something that I had not actually thought of, because there are people like George Soros who are known for shorting currencies of other countries. Happened in 1991 with UK, where he actually showed how much artificially the currency was there. But again, before I go to the international actors, I have to come back to Pakistani people and the cartels here that actually show you the lust that is involved. Because there are people, Sana, who are, let us face it, consequences. Yeah. For example, I was talking about this government. Let us talk about the previous government. When Afghan policy, Afghanistan, change in Afghanistan was coming, everybody could see what kind of government is going to come into Afghanistan. And because it will be isolated, there will be pressure on your currency reserves, because people will try to smuggle your liquid currency, liquid forex availability towards Afghanistan. You did not take any measures. At that time, Imran Khan Sahab was all fan of Afghan Taliban, and without consideration for the local people here, right? Because of that kind of situation also, we keep on losing it, but there is a lot of lust. Why is it that the prices of all commodities, whenever Ramzan comes, go to, through the roof? Why is it that in Western societies that our so-called Occidentalists keep on betraying, whenever there is Christmas, whenever there is Thanksgiving, prices come down to half? This is perhaps, we pride ourselves in being Muslims, but the same people actually keep on shorting products, and actually not shorting, but actually they keep on creating higher costs by withholding the supply. Why is it? If we are not going to handle our own dark economy or undocumented people, then things will continue to go from bad to worse. Another big example is whenever you actually go for taxing, there are two problems with our taxation. One, documentation, the other one, the holy cows that are there. And holy cows are not the traditional ones that we keep on talking about, but very simple, sitting right before our eyes. Value added taxes are needed whenever you want to estimate who is making how much money in creation of any product. Whenever we actually go for that item, our sellers, our traders immediately go on strike, right? Simultaneously or similarly, whenever you want to tax the traders, some political force, it used to be Julia Bazar, Karachi, MQM used to actually step in and demand that you take back that demand. But it has been happening repeatedly, and we have been conceding at the cost of the common consumer, the poorest of poor, because then you have to actually crank up the GST. Because of all these messes, we are creating such a situation which will become very difficult to extricate from. So again, I understand that IMF occasionally is behaving like an enforcer or not only of the US or Western powers, but India as well, or Adani Group for that matter. But no matter, at this moment it is important for us to fix our own house. And I think that while Dr. Saab is right, we have met more or less all the demands. There was one stumbling block, that was you are going to attract more money from your friends. So get assurances, written assurances. Perhaps that has been a tricky business. But having said that, at this moment, it worries me that we have to wait for the next week for the staff level agreement to reach somewhere, because the IMF's board has started meeting yesterday and we were not on agenda. We can be added to the agenda if we do it quickly, but we keep on spending or wasting too much time. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
You can't actually think about optics without saving or safeguarding the economy. If you cannot handle it, leave it.
Dr. Aqdas, given the current situation within the country as well, and of course the kind of issues that Farrukh have been pointing out, it's perhaps not limited to what we're dealing with just today. This is something that we've seen in the past, and again we've come to the IMF and the situation many times, but of course right now it is far worse than we have experienced before. But the kind of political and concerns that we've had in the past, and the kind of economic measures that we have taken or perhaps are not willing to take still is something that is a concern, even if we have the staff level agreement. And we keep on hearing how this is something that is till the end of the fiscal year, and there's not a lot of time in that as well. Moving forward, there is of course a lot of eyeing in terms of the staff level agreement at the moment, but moving forward from there, even if we take into account the inflow coming from friendly countries, how will Pakistan be able to sustain this particular triumph, if we have that, after the end of the fiscal year, because this one will end then?
Right. I think there is talk that once we reach the end of this fiscal year, Pakistan is going to have to ask for another extended fund facility. But I think we are very far from June. It's although it's 3 or 4 months away, but I think it's still very far away. I think our problems are very immediate, and we are facing those problems now. So I think the first and foremost thing that the government needs to do is to make sure that no matter what the IMF asks them to do, they have to make sure that this tranche is released to the Pakistani government so that we can stabilize the economy. And I think once that is done, there are estimations that a significant amount of foreign exchange flows are going to come into Pakistan in order to provide the necessary buffers that we are going to require. So I am not thinking or really contemplating what's going to happen beyond this present moment in which we are in such dire need of the IMF tranche.
Right, and I understand that, Dr. Aqdas, why that is so given the urgency of the situation. But my question was with regards to how we will be able to take a measure today to be able to have the kind of long-term consequence that we need. For example, the kind of fundamental changes that are required or reforms that are required with regards to a conversation with the IMF as well. They must be taken today, right, to have the influence in the next couple of months.
Well, I mean, one of the things or the reforms that you're talking about, long-term reforms that the IMF demanded, was addressing the massive circular debt in the energy sector. And I think there have been many efforts by this government to not only stop more additions into the circular debt, but try to figure out a way to reduce that. Because I think the IMF is right. I think there is a very real danger that if this is not addressed in the medium term, this could eventually choke up Pakistan's entire energy sector. So I think there have been steps taken, and I know for a fact that there are many efforts afoot in which the government is trying to look at revenue mobilization in a new way. And they're trying to look at ways in which those sectors can be taxed that have not been taxed to date. I mean, this includes the agricultural sector. This includes many other sectors. So I think there is definitely that talk going on in Islamabad, but I think just like me, they are also very worried about the current economic situation, and they're probably not able to focus on the long term right now.
Right. Farrukh, there's also the concern of the surcharge on the electricity prices as well, which, correct me if I'm wrong, was something that the IMF was talking about to be implemented in the years to come, and perhaps not just in the time frame of the 4 months, which again is something that has been talked about as being unreasonable and not something that Pakistan can perhaps look towards right now. And what I was discussing with Dr. Aqdas was also in terms of decisions taken right now, which are not going to be limited to the 4 months. Is that something that can be done?
Right, Sana, I think that IMF cannot be so insane that it won't actually realize that Pakistan is a parliamentary democracy, which also is a federal system, and it also has judiciary for that matter, and nobody can actually commit something of this sort beyond the immediate purview, right? This government is going to get dissolved by the end of the year. There's going to be an election. So how can they actually commit on the behalf of the caretakers or the next government? So this, I think the biggest problem right now that is really affecting our environment is the Chinese whispers. Because we don't have a proper communication channel between IMF and Pakistani media, and then even our finance ministry and Pakistani media. So in the end, what happens is you are fed with a lot of suboptimum information. For example, earlier this week, one colleague of ours actually called me and said that there is a report that perhaps the salaries will not be transferred. And I asked him, how is he saying this? He said that perhaps this finance ministry is putting out this message, and I asked for some kind of evidence. He sent me Economist.com's link, or perhaps the news's report by Mehtab.
Okay.
And then I actually dug it up. I immediately told him that it is fake news because somebody, remember, finance ministry also has bureaucrats, and some are holdovers from the previous government. So there are many who might not be happy. So anybody can say whatever they want. Usually it does not happen, because whenever departments of government are involved, the fiscal policy is made at the start of the year, and every expenditure of this sort from departments and the government is actually computed in, right? Similarly, and then of course, the very report was saying, quoting the finance minister, that this is probably fake news, and in the end it was proven it was fake news. But then a lot of people were perturbed because of the kind of reporting that went on. Similarly, over the weekend there was a deep background briefing, and because most of it did not come out the way it was supposed to, unfortunately, look at the extent of what was being misreported. That IMF, this is true, they think, or the finance minister, certain elements would think that IMF keeps on shifting its goalposts, but then somebody would say that, look, IMF is asking you to surrender your nukes or something like that. Oh, bhai, they don't have the kind of purview to do that.
Yeah.
This kind of, messing up, especially this reference to 1998, and then of course, then our imagination goes free. Because of that, I don't know what exactly is being demanded and delivered, but rest assured that national security of Pakistan is not being asked by anybody to be compromised. The only thing where a lot of people had raised eyebrows when we actually brought in the Governor State Bank at that time from IMF, at that time there was one concern, this demand that all government accounts should, departments should operate from one account, and that actually stays with State Bank. State Bank is Pakistan's. So are the accounts that we actually handle in. Is it not important to consolidate all the records? It has nothing to do with the national security policy or security issues. So all this misreporting actually contributes, and look at how things are. The Prime Minister, I think, is very clear about how things have to operate. But media, because of course every government, and this is a 13-member 13-party coalition government, every element would actually try to do their own politics, and media keeps on getting played. And because of that, repeatedly, on one side, when we are not meeting the demands of IMF or there is no agreement, media scandalizes that. But whenever you start meeting the demands, media scandalizes that also. So you can practically, if you are in Pakistani media, have your cake and eat it too, because hey, the country is at stake. You are not.
No big deal.
No big deal. If we don't correct ourselves, I think that our future generations will write that Nero was a better ruler or better people than the kind of people we have become, and we keep on undermining our own state. We shouldn't be doing this.
Absolutely. Dr. Aqdas, there is also concern coming in from the business community. Of course, they are also suffering, and the conditions right now are not something that is conducive. But when we take a look at the restrictions and the way that we are dealing with the IMF at the moment and the kind of measures we need to take, there are, of course, the conditions that we've already met, particularly in terms of the exchange rate as well. There were some ranges being quoted in terms of how if the dollar appreciates further, then the state bank may intervene, and then the business community is also demanding that this may happen considering where we stand today. Is that something that we can even think about at the moment and is feasible? And what sort of a range do you think there should be for that? Should we be able to go ahead with this exchange rate as the IMF has asked us, despite whatever the value of the rupee is, or will there be a point that the state bank would have to come in?
Look, I fully realize the problems that the business community is facing, especially with respect to this massive jump in the cost of borrowing capital, which comes from this increase in the interest rate. It's just been increased to by 300 basis points, the highest interest rate in almost 30 years. So, I mean, this is going to create a lot of problems. This is going to force many businesses to close even, which is going to add to overall unemployment in Pakistan. Having said this, I think this idea that the state bank has the kind of foreign exchange reserves or the inclination to intervene, I think that is completely misplaced. I think neither does the state bank have the exchange rates, the foreign exchange reserves, and it doesn't have the inclination to intervene in the exchange rate market any longer. So I think that is something that is just not going to happen, because we simply do not have the foreign exchange reserves to play this game.
Right. And so given this situation, do you think that there's any sort of concession or margin that can be provided to the businesses, or are we going to go ahead with this expectation that this is part of how we're going to proceed with and part of the consequences that we'll have to face, that businesses would shut down, and that is it?
I see very limited options as far as the government is concerned. I think eventually we are going to unfortunately see some creative destruction going on in Pakistani economy. But I think my mind is really occupied these days with the kind of inflation that the most vulnerable sections of this society are facing. I mean, the poor people of this country are facing an inflation that is highest since we started keeping records about inflation in 1965. So I think that's what is really keeping me up at night. And I would really like to see the government step up, try to find more means to enlarge what is being given out under the Benazir Income Support Program. And I would like the private people, the citizens of this country, the rich people of this country to step forward and to find ways to set up soup kitchens, to set up free meals like Ceylani all over Pakistan, because food inflation is even higher than 32% in Pakistan. So I think this is a time when this nation needs to come together, the government and the people, and we all need to work together in order to fight this really the worst economic crisis this country has seen in its history of the last 75 years.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Aqdas, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Thank you very much for your time. Yes, Farrukh.
Yeah, very quickly, I just wanted to add to what Dr. Saab was saying regarding particularly, food inflation. I think that people, especially policymakers, don't have the actual assessment of how badly the poor is suffering at this moment. Usually, the people I come across, and they're not even the most vulnerable, although they're vulnerable, are actually rationing their food. They can't have 3 square meals, even though their definition of meal is much lesser than ours. So one compliment that I used to give the previous government was their SAS program, particularly their Langar program, and then their healthcare programs. I think that it will be great, and that had a major component of the private sector. So I think that it is a great idea. That I don't know whether you have seen that video, Sana, where a Pakistani family is wedding their daughter in Dubai or Saudi UAE, and they are weighing her in gold.
Wow.
And right, so on one side you have such a rich people, on the other side people can't even afford basic protein and vitamins for their children. So I think that please step up and start contributing. This is a great idea. I wanted to say one thing about IMF. Everybody keeps on saying that it is Pakistan's survival, but it is also IMF's survival, how it is being viewed, because we are fighting and fighting at this moment all over the world. IMF doesn't realize that it is going to have the Douglas Adams curse, that they actually destroyed Arthur Dent's house.
Yes.
And then Vogons came and demolished the earth. So
Right.
IMF can also fail and totally fail if it doesn't take cognizance of the suffering of common man.
Right.
Please accelerate it.
Absolutely, and that is something that we need to think about. But of course, our concerns with Pakistan also remain, and the people who are suffering immensely considering the current economic conditions, and we need to think about them and not just point fingers at international institutions. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll see you tomorrow.